Hi everyone, welcome to day 5 of an introduction to Shakespeare. I hope you enjoyed this week of lessons and that you have really got to grips with the time that Shakespeare was living in, a little bit of information about his life, and got an idea of who he was. And now we've started to look at one of his plays, which is A Midsummer Night's Dream. And yesterday you looked at a summary of the story and you looked at a in-depth video and animation of the story. So I hope you've got a good idea of the story. Like I said, we're not going to read the whole play because it is quite complex and it would take a lot of time, and it's quite difficult trying to read it to you and explain it to you over video. So being there in person would be much better for me. Okay, so today is Friday the 26th of June. And you are going to understand the themes of A Midsummer Night's Dream today. So that's what we're going to be looking at in a little bit more detail. So if you can write the date and LI and underline it, that would be great. So first thing I want you to do is to have a look at the great chain of being. So this is a picture, if you can see, of layers of society, okay? And it said, Elizabethans believed that God set out an order for everything in the universe. This was known as the Great Chain of Being. On Earth, God created a social order for everybody and chose where you belonged. So at the top, we have God, then we have his angels, and then we have the stars and the moon, and then under that we have kings, then princes, then nobles, then commoners, then animals, trees, plants, precious stones, precious metals, all other minerals, and finally hell, right at the bottom. So if you have a look, you can see that for humans, commoners are the people that are the poor, and animals come after them. Okay, so you can see that the kings are the highest civil or the highest rating or part of position in hierarchy for the society. Okay, so they are obviously under God and the angels. So how does this information help us to understand the fairies' attitudes towards Athenians in A Midsummer Night's Dream? So it kind of suggests that actually the angels or the fairies are higher up, aren't they, in the hierarchy? So that's probably why they don't treat them. They treat them in a kind of toy, like almost like toys, because they were putting the drops of the flowers onto Demetrius and Lysander, and they didn't really care about the feelings. They just said, oh yeah, let's just put it on and then see what happens. So for them, it's a bit like blasé. They don't really care about their feelings. Number 2, how does this information help us to understand how Theseus treats Hermia in A Midsummer Night's Dream? So if you remember, Theseus is a king, okay? And Hermia is his daughter, but nowhere on this list is there a princess label. It's princes, but no princess. So have a think about how does that mean that Theseus can treat Hermia. And the last one, how does this information help us to understand the structure of the Globe Theatre? So now we're going to link it back to our first lesson where we looked at how people were sitting or standing during performances. So think about that and think about, where did the commoners sit? Where was the gentleman's box? And kind of see if you can link in that information. Okay, so I would like you to please answer those 3 questions in your book before moving on. So in A Midsummer Night's Dream, there are lots of references to mythology and folklore. A myth is a traditional story that is not based on something that really happened and is usually about a superhuman being or hero. The most famous myths are those of the ancient Greeks. These are stories that tell of gods with power over all aspects of the world, including love, thunder, and war. There are many famous myths, such as Theseus and the Minotaur. So as I mentioned on the other slide, there is a story about Theseus and the Minotaur. So Theseus actually features not only in Shakespeare, but also in Greek mythology as well. So one of those stories is Theseus and the Minotaur. So we're just going to have a read of that Greek myth. So, in addition to his role in Midsummer Night's Dream, Theseus is also an important figure in Greek mythology. One of the most notable themes that follows Theseus throughout Greek mythology is his relationships with women. In addition to stealing away with Hippolyta, which is his wife-to-be in Midsummer Night's Dream, he also abducted Helen and attempted to abduct the goddess Phosphorone. However, Theseus primarily gained fame as the heroic founder and defender of Athens. Perhaps the most famous myth involving Theseus is the story in which he kills the Minotaur, a legendary hybrid creature with the torso of a man and the head of a bull. The story of Theseus and the Minotaur also involves a relationship with a woman. In order to kill the Minotaur, Theseus has to find his way to the center of a labyrinth and back out again. He accomplishes this with the help of Adrian, who gives him a ball of thread to mark his path in and out of the labyrinth. After escaping the labyrinth, Theseus promises to marry Adrian, but ends up abandoning her. So he's not a very nice person. He still feels like he has control over women. And although he seemed to be a hero, he still has areas of his personality which aren't so heroic. Okay, so now let's talk about folklore. So folklore is the body of expressive culture, including stories, music, dance, legends, oral history, proverbs, jokes, popular beliefs, customs, and more within a particular people. This also includes the oral traditions of that culture, subculture, or group, and many have a moral of the story. So basically, folklore are the things that have been passed down in generations, stories that your grandparents may tell you, or your parents may tell you about your culture, about your religion, about customs within your community, things that people believe that may not be true, but it's a belief that people hold close to their heart. You might have folk songs as well, or folk tales that you hear, stories that have been passed on to children to, help them get to sleep. So things like that are like related to a certain culture or religion. Now, Rudyard Kipling is an author of Just So Stories, and you've all looked at Just So Stories before in the autumn term. And those were based a lot on folklore, and stories like The Jungle Book that he'd written also are based on stories he'd heard about the jungle and the animals and how they relate to each other. And they may not be true, but they're beliefs that are held true by that culture. So this is what I would like you to do. I want you to think of and research some stories that are myths and some stories that are folklore. And you can just go on Google and type them in and lots will come up. And I want you to watch, there's 2 stories I've put links to below on a YouTube link. So you can watch those first to give you a starting point, because there's some stories there that these are mythical stories that you will actually have heard of before. And then I want you to create a spider diagram or a poster or a way of presenting it of different types of stories that are mythical stories. Okay, and some may overlap, some may be mythology, but also folklore at the same time. And I want you to send me your work to year6@grange.harrow.sch.uk. If you can, maybe try and link some of these myths to Shakespeare and see if you can find some references to Shakespeare, to mythology in Shakespeare. So if you type it in on Google, there are actually some good links actually that tell you, or some good websites that tell you about Greek gods being referred to in Shakespeare, just like Theseus is referred to in Midsummer Night's Dream. Okay, well done, and I will speak to you on Monday.